Hi guys, welcome back. This is part 3 of the Neurobiology Essentials for this little playlist that I've put together. However, I will say I'm not really going to talk about neurobiology exactly this time. However, I've been getting a question a lot from clients and also just in the community with friends and other people that I talk to about the pacing of trauma processing. When somebody comes in for trauma. Usually this is related to EMDR because they know I'm an EMDR therapist. So I'm going to talk a little bit about not just EMDR, but on the broader scope of trauma processing and what we can expect, what you might expect if you are having a family member who is in the middle of trauma processing or starting that, or if you yourself are considering coming in for trauma processing. Just found this question's come up a lot. So I thought, hey, we'll throw a video out here, make this part 3 and keep going. So the first thing to know is that there is basically a lore of EMDR that is life-changing, like it's miracle working. You'll have this, people like, it changed my life. And I want you to know that 100%, me personally, it changed my life. However, we got to put that in context, okay? The other thing that you're going to hear 50-50 really is horror stories about EMDR, where somebody will say, oh yeah, I've heard about EMDR. A friend of mine went one time and it was a horrible experience and it made all of their symptoms worse, and so they didn't go back. That's also 100% reality, that can happen. The reality of trauma processing is where we want to put this in context, right? First of all, a lot of folks, there's what we call trauma and there's complex trauma. Complex trauma simply means that there are layers to the trauma that a person may have experienced. Trauma without complexity can still be pretty complex. In other words, a lot of times we think of complex trauma as someone who had a lot of adverse childhood events. So maybe we grew up in a home with neglect, abuse, etc. Or maybe we were an adult. Maybe it wasn't childhood. Maybe we were an adult, had a great childhood, but married someone and experienced domestic violence, or perhaps went to college and had a sexual assault, and maybe that occurred a second time after college, or we may develop sort of a pattern where we've had traumatic events in our lives that we have experienced, regardless of when it came from or what time that those might have happened. Those things lend complexity. They put layers onto our experiences when it comes to being able to approach the trauma for processing. But we can also have someone who went through something traumatic that was a one-time event. So maybe they had a great childhood, have not had any major things happen, but were in a horrific accident of some sort or had a horrible injury of some sort. That, although would be a one event trauma type thing, it can also have complexity simply because, you know, there's all layers that might have happened with it, okay? So when we use the word trauma, it gets thrown around a lot, but it is often complex. That's just the heart of it. A lot of people, if we are not functioning and our symptoms out there in the world are leading us to come into counseling, that usually means that we've got some complexity to our experiences. There's lots of layers. So the reality of trauma processing is that it's usually pretty complex. Now, when people come into trauma processing, they usually want to get on with it, right? It's like, hey, I'm here, I'm tired of suffering, I'm willing to work, I've been through hard stuff, I can handle it, let's do it. Let's use this EMDR miracle and get this trauma out of my bucket, right? And that's admirable. We all feel that way. I felt that way when I first started going to EMDR therapy and processing my own trauma. Let's get her done, right? So the one thing I want you to know about that is that experience, that feeling, is something that both the client and the clinician have to work with through the entire process of trauma processing. And I'm going to explain to you why that is. So let's talk about kind of what you can expect going into processing trauma. The first thing that you're going to get is hopefully some really good psychoeducation. The videos that I've provided, part 1 and 2 on neurobiology, those represent some of the information that most of my clients get right up front so that we can contextualize what we've been through, so we can start seeing it as symptoms and experiences and things that are not due to our character, right? These are not flaws or failures, but these are experiences that we've had. We've had real physical neurobiological effects from the things that we have been through. That's what the psychoeducation does, kind of sets the stage, helps us to frame things appropriately. The second phase that will happen with processing is always, and it does not matter what modality or intervention is being used. So maybe it's not EMDR, maybe it's TFCBT or some other type, but the very first thing that we're going to do after getting some psychoeducation is that we're going to introduce resourcing. Internal resourcing for myself, the client, right? This looks like learning what regulation of my nervous system looks like. Because what do I want to do? I've got to go to my window of tolerance and widen it. I have got to learn to calm my heart, my mind, as well as relax my physical body when I'm experiencing neurological activation. When we do that, it has all kinds of cascading events that are super helpful. We learn through regulation skills, we learn how to become present in the moment, which means that if my focus is on the present moment, what's happening in my body and calming and relaxing my body, that means it's pretty impossible for me to, at the same time, be anxious or worried about something or be ruminating and depressed because I have kind of turned my focus towards the present moment. And usually for most of us in the present moment, we're feeling safe. We're actually safe. We can look around and go, oh yeah, no, I'm fine right now. Now I can do it. So when we learn to regulate and calm, that's one of the things we're doing. The other thing that it does is that it teaches how to become grounded. But a grounding is still the same thing as becoming present in the present moment. There's just this great benefit to becoming very present. And you will also hear this verbiage used when people talk about mindfulness. So mindfulness is it's not really a therapy that I use directly, but it is kind of part of this idea of becoming very present, mindful of the present moment. So that might be looking like turning my mind towards getting in touch with what's happening in my body right now. That might look like feeling my feet on the floor. Or when I begin to slowly breathe, I can start turning inward a little bit, noticing what's happening in my physical body. Those are naturally calming, right? It calms down our cognitive spirals that we're getting into. It physically, with breath work and becoming mindful or present in the moment, helps calm our heart rate. It helps calm everything down. The other piece of that is that we are training the brain to understand or access what it's like to be relaxed. So this means like having tension released from my body. And so through this training, we are resourcing the client. I am becoming resourced that I can access my abilities, my capability to calm and regulate my nervous system, even in the face of whatever might be happening or the triggering I might be experiencing. My heart rate's up, but now I'm able to feel like I have my feet under me and that I can do this. I can calm down my body. Very important that we learn how to do that first, and I'll explain why in just a second. The next thing that has to happen, or that will be happening, is that we are going to be building rapport and relationship with the clinician, or the clinician with the client, right? The clinician has to learn to understand and assess the client's nervous system. So when I'm sitting with you as a trauma therapist, or I'm sitting with you, I have to be able to help you catch when you're becoming activated so that I can notice it and help you notice it if we don't yet have that skill, that regulation on board. you're going to need some support in noticing, like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm actually breathing a little faster. I'm talking faster. My heart rate's up. I'm becoming more animated as I'm talking. Those are all physical indications of what might be happening with my nervous system. So, as a clinician, I need time to get to know you, and to know your nervous system and to understand what activation might look like for you personally. And while we're doing that, so while you're coming in and meeting me, I'm giving you some psychoeducation, I'm walking you through some calming skills, relaxation skills, we're practicing those. I'm asking you about what that looks like out in your world when you're not in counseling. Through all of that, you and I get to know each other and we build rapport. You're, as the client, going to need to trust me when it comes time to start looking at hard things. As a clinician, I'm going to be asking you to trust me at some level to, is it time to look at something? Is it time to process something? Are we there yet, right? So really important, because I, as a clinician, want to make sure that you have trust in my ability to support you and to guide you when you're feeling distress in office, right? Or even out in the world, that you can rely on me. And so that takes time. We have to build rapport. So that's also happening and is also very important to the trauma processing that's coming, right? The next thing that's going to be happening, we could call this number 4, is what we call gradual exposure, and I kind of mentioned it, assessment of tolerance. So gradual exposure means that when we are approaching working on trauma, we are not going to be jumping into the deep end of the swimming pool, right? We're not painting Mona Lisa overnight. We are going to go very slow. We are going to expose you to the trauma in a gradual way. And that's important because we need to have, as in the previous videos that we talked about, our goal is never to, we don't want to create distress. We don't want to have you become dysregulated, because we know that the brain, the more it does of something, then what does it do? It can shorten my, or narrow my window of tolerance. So the more times that I relive or get re-exposed to my trauma, the potential I have for my tolerance actually being reduced. So it's important that it is regulated, right? So we're not just regulating our nervous system when we're out and about, we're also regulating while we get exposed to the trauma. So you can see now why the regulation skills, the relaxation skills are so important. My brain has to know what it feels like to be relaxed, to have no tension in my muscles, so that I have somewhere to go. I have a place that I can move into, so I can shift my nervous state, my neurological state, when I need to, because when I get exposed to trauma, as we start working on it, I am going to become activated. So we do this gradually, okay? The other thing is that as a clinician, while I'm getting to know you and sharing and seeing how you respond to certain education pieces, what's working for you, maybe there's some skills that like just don't relate, they just don't work for you. And as we get to know that, what I am also doing as I gradually expose you to your trauma, which I will be doing every visit in some way, I'm going to expose you a little bit, because I need to assess how are we doing, my nervous system, how is it tolerating being exposed to the hard stuff, right? So this is a nuanced but very intentional part of trauma processing, is the gradual exposure. So what does that look like? That might look like that I mention hard things, like the hard stuff. When we look at the hard stuff, that is me gradually a little micro exposure to your hard stuff, because I know that all I have to do is mention hard stuff or the hard stuff you've been through, and there's a potential for you to have images, memories, body sensations, thoughts and emotions that will come up just by that mentioning it. Okay, so obviously I am going to be careful about the language that I use, when I use it, and also my timing for having you think about or exposing you to the hard things that you have been through, that trauma. So I'm also assessing when I do that. When I mention hard things, you seem to take that fine. No results from that from last week. Okay, this time I might actually mention how old you were, or I might say something about, yeah, I might use the words abuse, or I might use the word injury, or incident, or accident, or something that is a little bit more, uh, getting my foot down in. Now I dip my toe, now I'm putting my foot down into the water, so to speak, as exposure. And gradually we do that. So as a clinician, I'm kind of, there's this back and forth, there's a negotiation that's happening between exposing ourselves to the trauma, which is necessary in order to process it, and making sure that I don't exceed your window of tolerance and that we're continuing to train the brain and the nervous system good practice for calming and regulation, which builds the client's confidence in being able to dip my toe in and builds their trust in me as a clinician to guide us on this path, right? So, okay, number 5. Then once we've kind of been through all of this stuff, and as we go through these things, we're moving towards the trauma processing proper, you might say. Like we're actually, now we're doing it. Okay, so some of the ways, the treatments that are used for that is EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Another one is brain spotting. Another one is accelerated resolution therapy. And there's also trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. And there's a smattering of other things like somatic experiencing and some other body work or narrative type therapies that are used for trauma processing. That includes like the Agala model of equine assisted psychotherapy, which is a narrative based therapy. It's a very externalizing therapy where we put our things out there on the horse and then we can get some distance that way from it. And we gradually expose, and as we work through stuff. TFCBT has a process that last 16 to 20 visits to start off with, where eventually the client is going to be creating a narrative of the difficult thing that they went through. Accelerated resolution therapy is very similar to EMDR in that it uses bilateral stimulation, and but it does a lot of image replacement, which there's evidence that images and distress or that high emotion are really connected in the brain or associated to each other. So when we replace the images, we tend to see distress come down really quickly. And then we have EMDR and brain spotting. I'm not going to go through all of that, but essentially EMDR is the layman's like theory is that we think sort of what it's doing. It's an adaptive memory process where we are bringing the hard thing into my working memory, those unprocessed trauma memories. We're bringing it into working memory. We're applying bilateral stimulation in order to stimulate the brain to process it, perhaps in the same way it would during eye movement sleep, REM sleep. And this desensitizes and it processes and moves things, out from that funny stored spot, video 2, that might be the sticky note or the pen in it, pulls that into working memory, we stimulate it, we process it out. And then it has other phases where we're doing some other work on the adaptive side, which is important. So lots of stuff, lots of options for actually processing trauma. However, as we're going through this, and here's where we're talking about pacing, that the clinician's role is to maintain this process where I'm building your trust, right? And I'm exposing you to your trauma. I'm assessing your tolerance, and we're processing the trauma, right? We're actually doing it. And also you as a client are maintaining a process where you're trusting me a little bit as I ask you hard stuff and I mention things that we don't want to talk about. This is hard to look at, right? And as you practice your regulatory skills to build your tolerance and you report to your clinician, like, yeah, this is kind of how it's been. And also assessing for yourself, well, how do I feel? Do I even feel like today I can do more processing? Like it feels too much? Or, what do I need today? So you're also assessing yourself as you're going through the processing as well as doing the processing. So all kinds of things that are happening. So when it relates to trauma processing, the pacing, this is where the heart of it comes to, is I hope that you're beginning to see that this process is not going to unfold in 3 to 6 sessions, right? It's just too complex. There's too many things that need to happen if we want to do it properly. So to get to the place where we can process, in order to process, we have to be regulated. We have to be resourced. We have to be able to tolerate the exposure to that hard stuff in order to process it. And that just takes time. And I really need somebody that I can trust and that will help me make decisions about how quickly we do this. And so a good trauma therapist is going to be that person who is checking in with me and who is also helping me slow the horses down, so to speak, because all of us want to just get through it. We just want to do it. We have coped and survived and we're tired of dealing with it. So we want to be done, and we come into therapy with the idea of like, oh no, I can handle it. Like I'm already handling symptoms out here, right? However, we know that if we go too fast, if we jump into the deep end of the pool, we are much more risk at exposing you to a degree that you don't tolerate it. Your nervous system can't tolerate that. Now we're re-traumatizing, we're reliving it. And processing can't happen when we are activated like that. So just simply being willing to look at the trauma is not necessarily going to equate to it getting processed and moving into the past long-term memory where we want it, right? So it is a negotiation and it just takes time. If you have complex trauma with high or even medium or high ACEs score, so and if you've ever taken an ACEs test, you'll know what that is. It's 10 questions, adverse childhood events, right? And if you have answered, the higher you answer those, the more trauma that you had as a childhood during developmental periods with your nervous system, then you can consider your trauma to be of a complex nature. And you can expect that if you are with a good trauma therapist and moving in these therapies and doing all of these things, that therapy is going to look like a year, maybe a year and a half. We don't know, right? That doesn't mean that you're not going to experience relief before then, that it's going to take a year to feel relief. That's not true. You will have lots of really great activation, calming. You will have things be moving into the past. You will get some relief and things like that. That's all how we, what we're gauging, how we're doing. But it just takes time. So part of the reason I put this video together is because we get a lot of family members who are like, okay, or they know we're doing EMDR and they're like, okay, it's supposed to be like, yeah, we're supposed to just get it out of there. And did you process today? What'd you do today? And that's fine to ask and it's fine to talk about it. However, there's going to be lots of visits where we're not processing, right? Our brains need time. And sometimes I might not feel up to it. Why? Because of my tolerance. And that tolerance and my exposure to it needs to be navigated carefully. Okay, finally, after trauma processing, I've been going through this, have felt some relief. I'm actually beginning to experience some neurological changes where I've had kind of what we call a reset, if you will. That's what I call my own trauma processing, is I feel like my nervous system got reset, kind of like I'm operating on a different channel now. I don't have the distresses and the anxieties and things that I used to have, and it's pretty amazing. It's like, wow, who knew that this would result in that? But that does include some adjustments. So I have a different nervous system, so my body responds differently to interpersonal conflicts, to triggers that used to trigger me, to things, the way I used to think about things, the relationships that I have, the people in my life. All of those things are part of what it's like being on the other side of trauma processing. That also takes some time. And truthfully, I may experience adjustments to my life, right? For the rest of my life after coming through trauma processing. And a lot of that is going to be what we call post traumatic growth experiences, where, wow, okay, maybe I had relational damage as a kid, and now I have had, as in my post traumatic growth, I'm getting to experience dynamic relationship connections with people. Or maybe I'm experiencing dynamic emotional life where I used to be very locked down, very frozen. And now it's kind of like, oh, this is what normal level of grief looks like. Or being disappointed, like I mentioned in the second video, like, oh, okay, now I know, I learn what disappointment feels like for me, without becoming traumatized, depressed, or getting stuck, if you will. So these are kind of the elements that you can expect going, that you should be going through with trauma processing. Hopefully this gives you a little clue about how important it is to find a good clinician who, if you are wanting to process trauma, that you go to somebody who has experience, and who is confident in walking you through this. Also that they're using the entire program of the modality that they're offering. So if somebody is offering TFCBT, we know that's 16 to 20 sessions, right? And it's got steps, and it should include a lot of what I've mentioned already. If somebody's doing EMDR has 8 phases, not just a processing phase. It actually has all of this stuff built into it. So you want to just know that realistically, trauma processing takes time. There's some skills we have to build, there's some things we have to know, and then we're going to need to have trust and rapport building and be able to work with somebody who can lead us through as we're gradually exposed to the hard stuff. Our system tolerates it, we get that stuff processed, and then we start adjusting to life without the trauma that we have been carrying for so long. I hope this is helpful, and if you have any questions, let me know.